Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really fortunate. We have a few other people joining us, but I wanted to get started. It's about 3:01, so I thought we should stick to our schedule and get started. Again, thank you for joining us this afternoon. We're really fortunate to have two great panelists with us today, Dr. Stephen Selchen with Joseph Brant Hospital, and Jim Sweetlove, who is former chair of our foundation board and also a retired lawyer. So what I might do is ask Stephen and Jim to introduce themselves. But before I do that, I just want to let you know that we're going the format for today's webinar. So we're going to have a few conversation between three of us. I have a few questions I'd like to ask Jim and Steve. And then about 3:30, 24, we'll have time for questions from the group. And to ask your question, you can do a number of things. At the bottom of your screen, you will see the bar of some icons. And one of those icons is raise hand. And what you can do is raise your hand and I will come to you and I will unmute you and you can ask your question. Or if you prefer, you can type your question in the chat or the Q&A. Okay, and then we will go from there. So if you have any questions at all, please feel free to raise your hand or chat with me and I will answer them for you. So thanks again for joining us on what will be your legacy, or let's talk about your legacy. And so maybe, Stephen, can we start with you and just give a brief introduction?
Sure, happy to. And good afternoon, everybody. So my name is Stephen Selchen. I'm the Chief of Psychiatry and Deputy Chief of Staff at Joseph Brant Hospital. And Anissa, thank you so much for inviting me. And Jim, great to see you. And hopefully in person one of these days.
Thanks, Steve. And Jim, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, I think you're still on mute, actually, Jim. Sorry.
There we go.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank you, Anissa and Stephen. It's a pleasure to be joining you again for one of these sessions. And as Anissa said, I'm a retired lawyer. I'm not giving legal advice today, but I have long experience. I specialized in estates and trust law, so I had a long period of experience in estate planning and legacy giving. As Anissa said, I am the past chair of the foundation board, and I've served on the boards of another number of other community-based charities and continue to do so. And presently, I'm providing services as a mediator in estate matters by Zoom, which is challenging when you've got parties in different cities and trying to get them all to talk to each other and solve problems. But it's challenging, but it's rewarding. So I'm pleased to be here as well.
Great. Thank you. And Jim, while we have you off mute, stay off mute. I thought maybe we could start our conversation with you today. And I think, you know, over the last 15, 16 months through the pandemic, I think certainly many more people are thinking about estate planning, just given, you know, the pandemic and the death toll, and people really starting to consider, you know, what are our plans if that should happen to us? And I know particularly my age group with my peers who have families, so we've really started to have those conversations. So, you know, why is it important for people to begin that planning or even revisit that planning from time to time?
Well, I guess beginning the planning, if you haven't got a plan, it's important because if you don't have a plan and you die without a plan, principally a will and powers of attorney, you become sick and you don't have powers of attorney. It's going to be complicated in terms of how your affairs are looked after and how you're looked after. And it may not happen exactly the way you want, and the people making the decisions may not be the people you want to make those decisions. In terms of a will, if you don't have a will, you are what is known legally as intestate, without a will. And it doesn't mean that your money, your assets all go to the government, but there's a legislative plan that says what will happen with them. And that's very rarely the same as the plan you might want to make. And it doesn't allow for things like gifts to charities, trust funds for grandchildren, all those sorts of things. You can't do those things if you don't make a plan and have the documents in place to carry out that plan. And I will guarantee you, it will not work the way you want it to if you are making the decisions, and it's likely to cost you more, and you won't be able to do any kind of effective tax planning to reduce taxes when you pass away.
Okay, so I think you brought up a lot of good points, and I'm not sure it's only limited to the tax planning piece. There's
No.
a number of other things that people need to consider, particularly in how they wish to be remembered. So is there a short list or a guide that you can provide us?
As to how they wish to be remembered. One of
No,
the
like
other,
what should you consider when you're thinking about that?
one other point I should make is that if you don't have a will and you have children, they will get what they're entitled to when they turn 18. And most people aren't very comfortable with that. They wish it to be a later date to provide for education, those sorts of things. Now, looking at charitable giving, legacy planning, a lot of it is a matter of what you're interested in, what it is that coincides with your values, whether it be healthcare, your church, the environment, whatever it is. What are the organizations whose mission, vision, values, those cornerstones meet with your values in life and your families? That's where you should start thinking about benefiting charitable organizations. It's not called leaving a legacy for nothing. It is your legacy. It is a message to your family and to the community of what you find to be important. And a lot of people don't think that they have the wherewithal to do that. But if you sit down and look at your situation, things change over time. We've all seen what's happened with real estate values, for example. So people have a lot more enhanced ability to make these kinds of provisions and to do something meaningful in the community than they've ever had before.
Okay. And I guess, that leads me to next, and Steve, this might be a question for you. Particularly like a number of us, my age group, I guess, who still have their parents with them and also have young children. How do you initiate that conversation with, whether it be your parents or even your partners, about, legacy wishes, given that sometimes, we don't know what the will is, but you want to know what the wishes are. And so that can be a difficult conversation, particularly if you're a close family. Sometimes it's even more hard. So, do you have any suggestions on how you can approach the subject?
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're absolutely right. There's lots of conversation topics that can be challenging or difficult in certain contexts. I think that Jim, really, zeroed in from my perspective on one of the perspectives here that I think is so important, which is that this is really a conversation about values, and the conversation about values is something that we can have anytime with anyone. So this is, there's lots about wills and that kind of planning that maybe people are hesitant to talk with each other about. But starting a conversation with somebody you care about what is most important to them, what are the causes that are important, what are their values, what is the impact or impacts that they would like to have. That's a conversation that can be easier to have with loved ones. And in a lot of ways, it starts with that self-reflection, right? What is important to me? What do I value? What are the causes that are important to me? What's the impact and legacy that I would like to have? And it may actually be about sharing that. It may be about telling a loved one where this is a difficult conversation, that it's actually important to you that they know what you value. that was a complicated sentence, but right, that it's so starting with that, right? I really want you to know what's important to me. I've been doing a lot of reflecting, and so these are some of the things that are on my mind. And frankly, I think during the pandemic, we've all been doing a fair bit of reflecting one way or another. And so that kind of sharing can also be an opening to a conversation. And at the end, it's actually really about just getting to know the people that we love and care about better and on a deeper level.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I think, it might be the nature of my profession, but, this topic of leaving a legacy and leaving for a bequest or something for charities in people's estates, people come to me and ask my opinion on that. And so, Jim, from, as you, I'm sure, have counseled a lot of people on their estate planning, what reasons do you provide for considering a charitable legacy gift? And when they do decide that, what are the steps they need to take to confirm that legacy for a charitable beneficiary?
Okay, there's a lot of ways that they can do this, and I'm just building on something that Stephen said. In my opinion, just going back a bit, coming out of the pandemic, people have spent a lot of time reflecting, and they haven't been conversing with their families other than by Zoom and FaceTiming and things like that as much as they'd like. I think people are going to be more and more talking to their families about the things they've seen during the pandemic that they want to contribute to causes that will deal with things that they've seen during the pandemic, whether it's healthcare or the environment or anything. I think that people are going to be more open to sitting down with their families and saying, while we couldn't see you for 6 months or a year because you live on the other coast, we've been thinking about this and that. What do you think about it? And that flows both ways between the generations. Now, in terms of how people set things up, there's the most critical thing is talk to people. Talk to your lawyer, talk to your accountant, talk to your financial planner, talk to the charity, see how they can fulfill your wishes. And I know, Anissa, you always operate on this basis. It's what the donor wants.
Mm-hmm.
We will have at times at the hospital pressing needs, but it's really making sure it's what the donor wants. And I think that's a critical first step. Then you have to talk to all your advisors to make sure that everything fits together. It's no good if your insurance man says, let's make the hospital the beneficiary of your insurance policy, and your lawyer doesn't know that, and he puts something in your will that doesn't fit with that. There are lots of ways to do these things. There are monetary amounts that you can leave to charity, fixed amounts, which are good and particularly appropriate when the amounts aren't really large. When they get really large, in proportion to the size of your total estate, sometimes percentages are a better idea. And there are also specific things that you can leave to charities, like shares in a publicly traded company, an insurance policy, or a piece of it, a piece of your RIF. And some of those things have great tax advantages for you. So it's a matter of exploring all those things and getting proper advice. And again, talking to your family about it.
Yeah, it is important to share that, I think, with your family, so they're aware of your intention and your interest, and again, as we've said, your values piece. So I think I want to shift off a little bit from the technical side of bequests and leaving a legacy. And I think, Steve, the pandemic hopefully is starting to come to an end. At the very least, we can see light at the end of the tunnel. And while we've been in it, it's certainly affected the mental health of many, many of us. Although I don't think anyone has not been affected by it. So, what steps can people take to overcome that feeling of separation, isolation, and really, focus on building those relationships again, if not only in person, but how can we ease the burden?
Yeah, so such an important question, and I think something that we're all dealing with in one way or another. And certainly, as you said, I mean, there's nobody that hasn't been impacted by this in one way or another. And some look, I mean, some people have found some of the unexpected pleasant surprises during this, but the reality is that this has been aspects of this have been hard on absolutely everybody. And what I'd say is, there's lots that we all have in common as human beings. There's also lots that make us unique, and we all look at this in different ways. And part of why that's important is I think there's been a lot of opportunity for learning for ourselves over the pandemic. And if we haven't done some of that reflecting, we can do it now, because all the information, all of the data from the last 15 months or what have you is it's there for us. And what do I mean by that? What has been particularly difficult for us? Is it what we would expect? Is it different than what we would expect? And also, what's been helpful and what hasn't been helpful, right? And so I think about it in certain contexts. When I talk to a lot of people that have been, for example, working from home, to people that for years had said, "I wish I could work from home all the time." And some people have loved working from home, and some people are struck by how challenging that's been in ways that they weren't expecting, right? And that's part of what I mean by some of the surprises in one way or another. So using our actual experience as a kind of test or barometer of what's hard on us, what's helpful, what isn't helpful. And so in particular, when it comes to our relationships, when it comes to a sense of isolation, when it comes to, people that, either we haven't seen in a long time, haven't felt close to in the way that, we normally do. Again, looking at what has or hasn't happened with that over the last year. And I don't mean in a judgmental way, like, oh, I should have called that person more often or that kind of thing. But, but what has helped? Has it been phone calls? Has it been video, right? And the interesting thing about the video is that, lots of people are finding, Zoom and FaceTime exhausting and actually enjoying a classic phone call and things like that, right? So, there's studies on whether texting people during the pandemic has been uplifting or not in that way, right? And I don't think it's about one size fits all, but it's been about what have been meaningful ways of engaging, what haven't, what have you missed in particular, right? This is a chance for reflection again on what's most important to us, right? How do we spend our time? Or one of the things about the pandemic is, again, it's shined a light by all the things that we can't do. It's shined a light on how we spend our time, and there's probably lots of things that we value that we didn't give the kind of time that we wanted to when it was available, and only when we were stopped from being able to do those things, maybe sort of recognize that in that way, right? So so what's helpful to us, what isn't, what's important in that way, and then what does that mean as we start to hopefully ease our way out of this? And again, I'm very kind of cautiously optimistic about what we're seeing, because unlike during the first two waves, where we're at on the other side of this third wave is very strongly connected to vaccination and the like. So, little plug: if you haven't gotten your vaccination, please get vaccinated. But still things to be concerned about, and variants and things like that. But we're starting to see an easing that's very closely connected to vaccination. And so, as we start to come out of this, how do we be intentional? How do we be intentional about how we spend our time, and and the ways in which we do that. So the people that are important to me, what are the ways of communicating with them that have been helpful and haven't been? What does that mean in terms of going forward as we do this? How do we do this, without rushing as well? Both from a safety perspective, but also actually from a relationship perspective. Like, I think we also need to be honest. When we feel close to somebody, a part of that is kind of always there. And also, when we haven't been with people in the ways that we've been with them, there's some reacquainting to be done. And how do we give that the space and sort of honor that that it needs as well? How do we respect differences in terms of people's comfort level around being with each other, right? So I think one of the things that we're starting to see is some folks are like, I'm double vaccinated, bring it on, bring the driveway parties on, and that kind of thing. And other people are saying, hey, you know what, I'm not quite feeling ready for even if the government has said XYZ is allowed, I might not be quite ready for that. And actually respecting differences in those perspectives, and not necessarily having that mean that that somebody doesn't want to see you or that kind of thing. So there's a lot to it, and being reflective, respective of each other's needs, having those conversations like we were talking about before, not just about legacies, but about need. What do you need socially, psychologically, as we emerge from this, and what's been helpful and what hasn't been helpful.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important that we should always be kind, because not everyone's in the same place as everyone else, particularly with whether you're vaccinated or you're waiting to get vaccinated, you're trying to get back, and it can be, you don't know how people are feeling, and it could certainly it's really important to be open to everyone's kind of where they are in the spectrum of coming out of this thing. So I think those are really good points. And I also liked your points about really understanding what's important to you as we move forward. It's funny, I had this conversation but just this week. I was saying, we have a particularly busy week as compared to previous weeks of the last 18 months. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready to get back to the pre-pandemic piece, So I think it's really important that you take stock of where we are and go forward. So thank you for that. So we're at the point where I'm more than happy to take questions from the group. I do have a few questions for you that were submitted in advance. So maybe we can get started on those. And then if anyone in the attendees of the webinar would like to put their questions either in the Q&A at the bottom or the chat, or if you would like to actually ask your question, just raise your hand and I will get right over to you. So maybe Jim, we'll start with you. And you touched on this a little bit earlier, but we had a few people join us a bit later in the webinar. Can you talk about the different ways a gift can be left in a will, a charitable gift, that is?
Okay, so as I said before, it can be an amount of money, which is particularly appropriate unless it becomes very large and might affect other gifts proportionally. It can be a percentage of your estate, what's called the residue, after you've done other things, paid the bills and so on. It can be a gift of specific things, like publicly traded shares. It can be even things like pieces of real estate, a piece of a RIF, a piece of an insurance policy, pretty much anything. It doesn't have to be in a monetary form. And there are lots of times where it not being in a monetary form is advantageous. So there's a real scope there.
Okay, we do have a question submitted from Michael. And Jim, I think this is for you. Steve, you're welcome to jump in. But how often should a will be updated?
Okay, that's a question I often get, and that's a good question. And I would suggest that the proper way to look at this is how often should it be reviewed? You may review it periodically, every couple of years, and think about, have changes occurred in your family? Have your kids reached certain thresholds in age? Is there another generation to think about now? Have your assets changed, etc.? If any of those things have happened, has something happened to one of your children? Have they become married, become divorced, whatever? That should trigger you to look at your plan. But it doesn't mean you're necessarily going to have to change your plan, because if it was drawn up well at the start, it probably has a lot of alternatives built into it that say, if this happens, then this is what I want to see happen. If something else happens, then I want to see something else happen. My plan will work in a different way. But the key thing is to get the plan and to get the plan in place, and then look at it periodically, review it with your lawyer or whoever, and say, this is my situation now. Does this still work?
Okay.
So there's no magic in the timing.
Okay.
So I actually did have thoughts on that, but Jim's answer was much better.
Okay. He took the words right out of your mouth, didn't he? Okay. So the next question we have is that Jim stated one of the first steps is to speak to the company to whom you want to leave a legacy, company or the charity, I assume here. Given there are a number of different areas within Joe Brant, who would you recommend speaking to or with as a starting point? So maybe that would be a good question for me to answer. And then Steve or Jim, you can jump in. Truly, I think as a starting point, it would be a member of the foundation staff, as we have a really good sense of the number of different programs and the priorities that are within the hospital. Now, a priority today won't necessarily be a priority when the gift or the legacy is received, but we would be able to advise you on how it could be used, what that impact is, and we can also create the relationship in the introduction to the clinical teams and the leadership to really understand the impact of your giving. So I know many of you know Emma in our office. Emma Fitzpatrick would be a great person to chat with. You can always call me, or frankly, anyone in the foundation team would be happy to assist you. So we provide that side of the potential impact of the giving, but obviously we really encourage everyone to get their own legal advice and speak to their accounts as well on the financial piece. But we certainly help you with understanding what you can support and how it will be used. Okay. So I've got another question, and I think Steve, you may actually have an answer to this one as well, as our Deputy Chief of Staff, but Jim, you may choose to weigh in as well. So if a person has not selected a power of attorney for personal care and is brought to the hospital for medical care, how are decisions then made if they're not capable of making it themselves?
Sure. Yeah, that is a really important one, and Jim, you may want to weigh in on the legal components of that. But I think a couple of things come to mind as well on that. So, how important is something Jim was saying earlier about planning, so that when things happen, they happen as closely to your wishes as they can. So that might mean planning for power of attorney. It might mean discussing what your wishes are with folks, with loved ones. So we do have a legislated mechanism when, first of all, determining that somebody is not in a position to make their own decisions. And then if they're not able to make their own decisions, there's a kind of legislated sort of sequence of who we would turn to in order to make those decisions if there isn't already a designated power of attorney. And so it becomes things like a spouse, if there is a spouse, a child or a parent, a sibling, etc., kind of right down to the public guardian trustee. So there is a mechanism for it, but just as Jim talked about when when there's no will, being intentional when you can increases the likelihood that the person that is making decisions for you is somebody that you've chosen and is informed about what your wishes would be.
Okay, Jim, did you have anything to add to that, or?
I would only reinforce what Stephen said. There is this legislative hierarchy. And at the end of the day, if there is no person, as it were, there is always the healthcare consent, the consent capacity board can appoint somebody to make that decision for the person, or the public guardian and trustee can step in, but you never want to get to that stage. And it's important, a power of attorney for personal care is not a particularly, doesn't have to be a particularly complicated document or costly. And it's important that whoever you've named or you think of naming is someone, and I think Stephen alluded to this, who shares your values. They don't have to, I should rephrase that. They don't have to share your values, but they have to know what your values are, so that they will make as close as possible the decision that you would make if you were able to do it. That's the key in my view.
Yeah, and I think that last point and that clarification is actually a really important one. So for example, my wife and I had discussed, what we would want, if we were unable to make those decisions, and actually she and I have very different perspectives on what we would want for ourselves and frankly for each other. But knowing what she wants and her knowing what I want allow the other to make those decisions in accordance with the other person's wishes, and not actually, just what I would what I would otherwise do. And that's, although that can be challenging, that's probably the most respectful approach that we can have to a loved one, is to honor their wishes in that way.
Okay, and we have a follow-up question to this. And just to clarify, is a power of attorney only valid while the person is alive?
And the short answer to that is yes. Whether it's a power of attorney for personal care, which of course the care ends when the person passes away, or if it's a power of attorney for property to deal with the person's assets, the moment that person passes away, the authority given ends.
And where does that authority go? Is it goes to the executor of the estate, or?
Then it goes to the estate trustee, the
Trustee?
executor at that point. And sometimes they have to be appointed by the court, but at that point, whoever becomes the estate trustee has full legal authority.
Okay. Those are all the questions actually that we have. Are there any from any of the attendees I haven't gotten to? Double checking here. So I don't see any. So we've ended a little bit early, which is always nice. Get a little more time back to your day. Oh, sorry, we do have a Q&A here. One quick question here is an estate trustee and the executor the same?
For all intents and purposes, they are. Those terms are interchangeable.
Interchangeable?
It's just that there are people who can be estate trustees who are not executors. For example, somebody who doesn't have a will, there's no executor, but an estate trustee can be appointed. If a person's an executor under a will, they are also an estate trustee. Now there's legal gray areas in there of where an estate trustee's authority ends and a executor's authority begins, but for all intents and purposes, they are identical.
Okay.
And this is since we have the lecture of a little bit of time, I want to circle back to something that you were answering earlier, which is where to start. And I want to echo that speaking to you, a member of your staff, is an excellent way of starting with that, and certainly such a knowledgeable group in doing that. What I did want to say is, because I don't know that everybody realizes it, but as a clinician and a leader within the hospital, I get the privilege of seeing literally day in, day out, just what the extraordinary impact on people's lives these kinds of gifts have. And so there's really no way to go wrong. And if you have a specific thought in mind, or if you're, that you want to give to the hospital, but you're not sure where, then there's kind of no way to go wrong. And having that conversation with Anissa or her team, certainly, also, as Deputy Chief of Staff, happy to be, helpful at Anissa's discretion. But it's just so meaningful, so impactful, so transformative when people leave these kinds of legacy gifts.
Yeah, and I do want to, thanks for bringing that up again, Steve. I do want to really emphasize that our role in the foundation is about making sure the donors' wishes are achieved. That's our role. We facilitate generosity, and we represent both the donor as well as the organization, and to ensure that both benefit from what is, often a fantastic partnership in terms of these charitable donations. So that's our role, and we take a lot of pride, and it's really a privilege for us to be able to do that. So we're happy to help in any way. Okay, so I definitely do not see any other questions coming up. I'm checking all the areas where they can come. And what I will do is just thank Stephen and Jim again for taking the time to be with us this afternoon, and to thank everyone for their interest in attending this webinar and your interest in learning more about Joe Brant and how you can give to us and have a true impact on the healthcare of our community for years to come. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great afternoon. Looks like the weather's holding up, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.